The stagecoach overturned just as the sun reached its merciless peak over the Montana plains, throwing Jolene Hayes against the rocks like a rag doll while bullets from the pursuing outlaws tore through the wooden frame. She crawled behind a boulder, pressing her hand against her left side where the pain blazed hot and sharp, each breath feeling like broken glass grinding inside her chest. The bandits who had ambushed the coach wanted the payroll she was guarding for the mining company, and they had already killed the driver and the other guard before she managed to shoot 2 of them dead and send the rest scattering for cover. Blood seeped through her fingers as she reloaded her rifle with shaking hands, knowing she could not hold them off much longer. That was when the rider appeared on the ridge, a silhouette against the blazing sky, and the crack of his Winchester rifle sent the remaining outlaws fleeing into the dust. Jolene tried to stand, tried to call out, but the world tilted sideways and she collapsed against the rock. Heavy boots crunched across the dirt toward her, and she looked up into the weathered face of a man in his mid-20s, dark hair falling across his forehead beneath a brown Stetson, concern etched deep in his blue eyes. "Easy now," he said, kneeling beside her. His voice was rough but gentle, the kind of voice that had talked down spooked horses and calmed frightened cattle through lightning storms. He noticed immediately how she held her side when she breathed, the shallow, careful way she drew air into her lungs. "Let me see those ribs now." "I am fine," Jolene gasped, but even she could hear how unconvincing the words sounded. She was 22 years old and had been working as a security guard for the Yellowstone Mining Company for 8 months, one of the only women in Montana Territory doing such work, and she had too much pride to admit weakness. But the pain was overwhelming, turning her vision white at the edges. "You are not fine," he said firmly. "I am Nathan Quinn, and I have seen enough busted ribs to know when someone needs help. Those bandits are gone for now, but they might circle back, and we need to get you somewhere safe." She wanted to argue, but when she tried to take a deeper breath, the agony made her cry out. Nathan moved quickly, his hands careful as he examined her side through the torn fabric of her shirt. She could feel his fingers probing gently along her ribs, professional and methodical. "2 broken, maybe 3, he said. "You need a doctor, but the nearest one is in Miles City, and that is a hard 8-hour ride from here. Can you sit a horse if I hold you steady?" Jolene nodded, biting her lip hard enough to taste blood. Nathan lifted her with surprising gentleness for a man with such calloused, work-hardened hands, and she found herself pressed against his chest as he carried her to his horse, a sturdy roan gelding that stood patiently despite the smell of gunpowder and blood in the air. He mounted first, then reached down to pull her up in front of him, settling her carefully so that she could lean back against his chest. "Hold on to me," he murmured against her ear, and she felt his arm wrap around her waist, just below where her ribs screamed in protest with every movement of the horse beneath them. "I have got you." They rode slowly at first, Nathan guiding the horse with one hand while keeping her steady with the other. Jolene tried to focus on anything except the pain, studying the landscape around them, the way the prairie grass bent in the hot wind, the distant purple shadows of mountains against the horizon. June of 1884 had been brutally hot, and the drought had turned everything brown and brittle. She could feel the heat radiating from Nathan's body behind her, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the way his arm tightened whenever the horse stumbled over rough ground. "What were you doing out here alone?" he asked after a while, his voice low and soothing, probably trying to keep her conscious and talking. "Guarding a payroll shipment," Jolene said through gritted teeth. "We were heading to the mining camp at Cedar Creek. The company hired me because I am a good shot, and they figured nobody would expect a woman to be carrying $20,000 in gold certificates. Nathan let out a low whistle. 20,000. That would explain why those bandits were so determined. Did they get it? No, Jolene said with fierce satisfaction. It is locked in a strongbox under the driver's seat if the coach did not burn. They wanted me to open it, but I would rather die than give them that satisfaction. Brave and stubborn, Nathan said, and she could hear the hint of admiration in his voice. That is a dangerous combination out here, says the man who rode straight into a gunfight to help a stranger. I heard the shooting from my camp about 2 miles north, Nathan explained. I have been trailing a herd of wild horses for the past 3 weeks, trying to catch a white stallion that has been raiding ranch stock all across this territory. When I heard the gunfire, I figured someone needed help more than I needed to chase horses today. Jolene twisted slightly to look at him, then immediately regretted it as pain lanced through her side. You are a mustanger, among other things, Nathan said. I break horses, hire out as a ranch hand when work is scarce, and occasionally scout for the cavalry when they need someone who knows the territory. Been drifting since I was 18, never found a reason to settle down in one place. How old are you now? Jolene asked, partly because she was curious and partly because talking helped distract her from the agony radiating through her torso. 26 this past March, Nathan said. You? 22 last October, Jolene said. She could feel his heartbeat against her back, steady and strong, and somehow that simple rhythm was more comforting than anything else in that moment. I came out here from Philadelphia after my father died. He had worked in the mines there, and the coal dust killed him slowly. My mother died when I was 15, so there was nothing holding me to that city anymore. I wanted to see the West, wanted to be somewhere wide open where I could breathe. And now you cannot breathe because of broken ribs, Nathan said quietly. Fate has a cruel sense of humor sometimes. They rode in silence for a while, the sun beating down mercilessly, and Jolene felt herself drifting in and out of consciousness. Each time she started to slip away, Nathan would tighten his arm around her and speak her name, pulling her back from the darkness. She learned that he had grown up in Texas, that his father had been killed in the war, and his mother had remarried a man Nathan could not stand. So he had left home at 17 and never looked back. She learned that he loved the freedom of the open range, the challenge of working with wild horses, the way the stars looked when you were camped far from any town or settlement. Why did you help me? Jolene asked as the afternoon stretched long and golden around them. You could have ridden past, minded your own business. Nathan was quiet for a long moment, and she felt his chest rise and fall with a deep breath. My sister died when she was 19, he finally said. She was traveling with her husband when their wagon broke down, and she got sick from drinking bad water. They were 2 days from any town, and by the time they got help, it was too late. Her husband told me later that people had passed them on the road, seen them struggling, and just kept going. Nobody wanted to be bothered with someone else's trouble. I swore then that I would never be that person, never ride past someone who needed help. Jolene felt something shift inside her chest, something that had nothing to do with broken ribs and everything to do with the steady, honest man holding her safe in his arms. I am sorry about your sister. Her name was Nancy, Nathan said softly. She was the kindest person I ever knew. You remind me of her a little bit, the way you refused to give up back there, even when you were hurt and outnumbered. I had to fight, Jolene said. If I had let them win, then what would that say about me? That I am weak, that I cannot do the job I was hired for. Women have to be twice as tough as men out here just to be taken half as seriously. You are right about that, Nathan agreed. And for what it is worth, I think you are plenty tough. Most men would have passed out from pain by now, but you are still sitting upright and talking to me about philosophy." Jolene managed a weak laugh that turned into a gasp of pain. "Please do not make me laugh. It hurts too much." "Sorry," Nathan said, but she could hear the warmth in his voice. "We are about halfway to Miles City now. Can you hold on for a few more hours?" "Do I have a choice?" Jolene asked, but she squeezed his arm to let him know she appreciated the question, appreciated that he cared enough to ask. The sun was sinking toward the western horizon when they finally crested a rise, and saw Miles City spread out below them in the valley where the Tongue River met the Yellowstone. It was a rough frontier town of perhaps 1,500 people, built up around the railroad and the cattle trade, with false-fronted buildings lining the dusty main street and corrals full of livestock on the outskirts. Nathan guided his horse straight to the doctor's office, a small frame building with a painted sign that read Dr. Samuel Morrison, physician and surgeon. Nathan dismounted carefully, then lifted Jolene down, cradling her against his chest as he kicked the door open. A thin man with spectacles and graying hair looked up from a medical journal, his expression shifting from annoyance at the interruption to concern when he saw Jolene's pale face and the blood on her clothes. "Broken ribs," Nathan said without preamble. "Maybe 2 or 3 on her left side. She was in a stagecoach robbery about 4 hours ago." Dr. Morrison moved quickly, gesturing toward an examination table covered with clean white sheets. Nathan laid Jolene down gently, his hand lingering on her shoulder for a moment before he stepped back. The doctor cut away her shirt and the binding she wore beneath it, exposing the massive purple bruise that spread across her left side like spilled ink. Jolene closed her eyes, partly from pain and partly from embarrassment at being so exposed, but she felt Nathan's hand find hers and squeeze gently. "Stay with me," he said quietly, and she realized he thought she was about to pass out. Maybe she was. The room seemed to be spinning slowly, and the doctor's voice sounded like it was coming from very far away. 3 broken ribs, definitely, and possibly a 4th that is cracked, doctor," Morrison said, his fingers probing carefully along her side. "You are lucky they did not puncture a lung. I am going to bind these tightly to keep them stable while they heal, but you need to stay in bed for at least 2 weeks, and then take it easy for another month after that. Ribs take time to heal properly, and if you go back to rough activity too soon, you risk making it worse." "2 weeks," Jolene protested. "I have a job, I have responsibilities." "You have broken bones," the doctor said firmly. "And if you do not let them heal, you will end up with chronic pain for the rest of your life, or worse, a rib that heals wrong and puts pressure on your lungs or heart. Is your job worth dying for?" Jolene wanted to argue, but the truth was that she could barely move without screaming, and the thought of riding a horse or lifting anything heavier than a coffee cup made her feel sick. She looked at Nathan, who was watching her with those steady blue eyes, and saw nothing but concern there. "I will make sure she follows your orders," Nathan said to the doctor. "Do you know of a decent boarding house where she can stay while she recovers?" "Mrs. Patterson runs a respectable place 2 streets over," Dr. Morrison said. "Clean rooms, good food, and she does not tolerate any nonsense from drunks or troublemakers. Tell her I sent you, and she will take good care of your wife. She is not." Nathan started to say, but Jolene squeezed his hand hard and he fell silent. She understood the way things worked in frontier towns. A woman alone was vulnerable, subject to gossip and worse, but a married woman had the protection of her husband's reputation. If people thought Nathan was her husband, they would leave her alone to recover in peace. "Doctor." Morrison wrapped her ribs tightly with long strips of clean linen, binding them so that she could barely expand her chest to breathe. It hurt terribly, but she bit down on a leather strap the doctor gave her and endured it. He gave Nathan a bottle of laudanum for the pain and strict instructions about keeping the bindings clean and dry, then charged $5 for his services. Nathan paid without hesitation, though Jolene saw that it took most of the money in his worn leather wallet. "I will pay you back," she said as Nathan lifted her carefully and carried her out into the twilight, "as soon as I can contact my employer and get my wages." "Do not worry about it," Nathan said. "Money comes and goes. Your health is more important right now, Mrs. Patterson's boarding house was a two-story structure with a wide front porch and curtains in the windows. The landlady herself was a formidable woman in her 50s, with steel gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing, but her expression softened when she saw Jolene's condition. She clucked her tongue disapprovingly and led them upstairs to a corner room with a real bed, a washstand, and a view of the street below. "You poor dear," Mrs. Patterson said, helping Nathan settle Jolene onto the bed. "What happened to you?" "Stagecoach robbery," Nathan explained. "Her ribs are broken, and the doctor says she needs to rest for at least 2 weeks." Mrs. Patterson nodded knowingly. "Those bandits are getting bolder every month. The sheriff does what he can, but this territory is too big for one man to patrol properly. You just rest now, Mrs. Quinn, and I will bring up some soup and bread for your supper. Your husband looks like he could use a good meal, too." After the landlady left, Jolene looked at Nathan with exhaustion and amusement warring in her eyes. "Mrs. Quinn." "It seemed easier than explaining," Nathan said, pulling a chair over to sit beside the bed. "And safer for you. I hope you do not mind." "I do not mind," Jolene said softly. "Thank you, Nathan, for everything. You saved my life today, and I will never forget that." Nathan looked uncomfortable with her gratitude, shifting in his chair and studying his hands. Any decent person would have done the same. "No," Jolene said firmly, reaching out to touch his arm despite the pain the movement caused. "Most people would have ridden past, just like those people who left your sister and her husband stranded. You chose to help, chose to put yourself in danger for a stranger, and then you chose to stay and make sure I got proper care. That is not common decency. That is something rare and precious." Nathan looked at her then, really looked at her, and something passed between them that had nothing to do with gratitude or obligation, and everything to do with recognition. Two people who had been drifting alone through life, who had learned to rely only on themselves, suddenly seeing the possibility of something more in each other's eyes. Mrs. Patterson returned with a tray of food, breaking the moment, but after she left again, Nathan helped Jolene eat a few spoonfuls of soup, his hands steady and patient. The laudanum was starting to work, dulling the sharp edges of pain and making everything feel soft and distant. Jolene's eyelids grew heavy and she fought to keep them open, fought to hold on to consciousness a little longer. "Sleep," Nathan said gently. "I will be right here. I am not going anywhere. Promise," Jolene whispered, her voice slurred with exhaustion and drugs. "Promise," Nathan said, and she felt his calloused hand wrap around hers as she finally let herself drift into darkness. When Jolene woke, gray morning light was filtering through the curtains, and Nathan was slumped in the chair beside her bed, his head tilted back against the wall, fast asleep. She watched him for a long moment, studying the lines of his face, the shadow of stubble on his jaw, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead. He had stayed, just as he had promised, watching over her through the night even though he must have been exhausted from the long ride and the stress of the previous day. She tried to shift position, and immediately regretted it as pain flared through her side. The small sound she made was enough to wake Nathan, and his eyes snapped open, instantly alert in the way of men who had learned to sleep lightly on the frontier. "How are you feeling?" he asked, leaning forward to look at her closely. "Like I was thrown from a stagecoach and landed on rocks," Jolene said, trying to smile. "But alive, thanks to you." Nathan stood and stretched, his joints cracking audibly. "Let me get Mrs. Patterson to help you with anything personal you need, and then I will bring up some breakfast. The doctor said you need to eat regularly to keep your strength up." Over the next few days, a routine developed. Nathan would arrive early each morning, sometimes with fresh flowers he had bought from a Chinese vendor on the edge of town, always with a cheerful greeting and news from the outside world. He would read to her from newspapers and dime novels, tell her stories about his adventures chasing wild horses across the territory, help her walk slowly around the room when the doctor said she needed to move a little to prevent her lungs from getting congested. Mrs. Patterson clearly approved of him, often commenting on what a devoted husband he was, and neither Jolene nor Nathan bothered to correct her assumption. On the fifth day, when Jolene was feeling slightly stronger, she asked him about his life, really asked, wanting to know more than just the surface details he had shared during their ride to town. Nathan settled into his usual chair, thinking carefully before he spoke. "I have been running most of my life," he finally said. "Running from my stepfather, from the expectations people had of me, from the idea of settling down and becoming the kind of man who worries about property and respectability. I told myself I loved the freedom, loved being able to go wherever I wanted, but the truth is that I was afraid. Afraid of letting anyone get close enough to hurt me the way I was hurt when my father died, and then when Nancy died." Jolene listened quietly, understanding more than he was saying. She had her own walls, her own fears, built up over years of learning that she could only rely on herself. "But these past few days," Nathan continued, looking directly at her with an intensity that made her breath catch, "sitting here with you, talking to you, learning who you are beneath all that toughness and pride, I have started to think that maybe running is not the answer. Maybe the thing I have been looking for has been right in front of me all along, and I was just too scared to see it." "And what is it you have been looking for?" Jolene asked, her heart beating faster despite the tight bindings around her ribs. "A reason to stay," Nathan said simply. "A person worth building something with. A home, not just a place to sleep between jobs." Jolene felt tears prick her eyes and she blinked them back fiercely. "I barely know you, Nathan Quinn. We met less than a week ago. This could just be gratitude I am feeling, or the effects of laudanum making everything seem more intense than it really is." "Could be," Nathan agreed. "Or it could be something real, something worth exploring. I am not asking you to marry me tomorrow or make any promises you are not ready to make. I am just asking if you feel it too, this connection between us." "I feel it," Jolene admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I felt it from the moment you knelt beside me in the dirt and told me to let you see my ribs. I felt it in the way you held me on the ride here, and the way you stayed by my bedside all night, and the way you look at me like I am the most important thing in the world. But Nathan, I am scared. I have been alone for so long, and I do not know if I remember how to be part of something bigger than myself." Nathan reached out and took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "Then we will learn together," he said. "We will take it slow, give ourselves time to figure out what this is and what we want it to be. But I am not running anymore, Jolene. Not from this, not from you." She laced her fingers through his and held on tight, feeling something inside her chest loosen and unfold, something that had been clenched tight for years. "I am not running either," she said. The rest of her recovery passed in a golden haze of growing intimacy. Nathan told her about the white stallion he had been tracking, a magnificent animal that was rumored to be the offspring of Spanish horses that had escaped from missions generations ago. Jolene told him about growing up in Philadelphia, about watching her father waste away, about the desperate need she had felt to escape that life and find something better. They talked about books and music and politics, about the changing West and what it might look like in 10 or 20 years, about their dreams and fears, and the small private things that people only share when they are beginning to trust each other completely. On the 10th day, Dr. Morrison visited to check her progress and declared himself satisfied with how well she was healing. "You can start moving around more now," he said, "but no heavy lifting, no riding, and definitely no more gunfights with bandits." "I will do my best," Jolene said dryly, and the doctor chuckled as he repacked his medical bag. That afternoon, Nathan helped her walk downstairs for the first time, his arm solid and steady around her waist. They sat on the front porch in the sunshine, watching the town go about its business, and Jolene felt like she was seeing the world with new eyes. Everything seemed brighter, more vivid, full of possibility. "I need to contact my employer," she said reluctantly. "Let them know what happened to their payroll shipment. If the strongbox is still at the site of the ambush, someone needs to recover it before scavengers find it." "I rode out there 3 days ago," Nathan said, and when she looked at him in surprise, he shrugged. "I wanted to make sure the bandits had not come back, and I figured that gold was important. I found the strongbox and brought it to the sheriff here in Miles City. He sent a telegram to your mining company, and they are sending someone to collect it. They also sent a message for you saying they are sorry about what happened and hope you recover quickly." Jolene shook her head in wonder. "You are full of surprises, Nathan Quinn." "I try," he said with a smile that transformed his usually serious face, making him look younger and more carefree. 2 days later, a representative from the Yellowstone Mining Company arrived, a stern-faced man in a suit who listened to Jolene's account of the robbery and examined the recovered strongbox carefully before pronouncing himself satisfied. He paid her the wages she was owed plus a substantial bonus for protecting the payroll, and offered her continued employment once she was fully recovered. After he left, Jolene sat on the porch with Nathan and looked at the money in her hands, more cash than she had ever held at one time in her life. "This changes things," she said quietly. "I have enough here to rent a real place of my own, maybe even buy a small piece of land. I do not have to take dangerous jobs anymore if I do not want to." "What do you want?" Nathan asked, watching her carefully. Jolene looked at him, at this man who had ridden into her life at exactly the right moment, who had stayed when he could have left, who had shown her that maybe trusting someone was not as dangerous as she had always believed. "I want to build something," she said. "Something permanent and real. And I want to build it with you, if you are serious about staying." Nathan stood and pulled her carefully to her feet, mindful of her still healing ribs. He cupped her face in his work-roughened hands and looked into her eyes with an intensity that made her feel like she was the only person in the entire world. "I am serious," he said. "More serious than I have ever been about anything in my life. I love you, Jolene Hayes. I think I have loved you since the moment I saw you refusing to give up even when you were hurt and outnumbered. You are the bravest, strongest, most stubborn woman I have ever met, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving to you that you made the right choice in trusting me." "I love you too," Jolene said, the words feeling strange and wonderful on her tongue. "And I think I have loved you since you promised to stay with me that first night and then actually kept your promise." Nathan kissed her then, gentle and careful because of her ribs, but no less passionate for that. Jolene felt like she was falling and flying at the same time, all the walls she had built around her heart crumbling away to nothing. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathless and smiling. "So what now?" Nathan asked. "Do we stay in Miles City or do you want to go somewhere else?" Jolene thought about it, looking around at the rough frontier town that had been the setting for the most important days of her life. "I like it here," she said. "It is close enough to everything but far enough away to feel like we can make our own way. And there is good land available outside town, near the river. We could buy a piece of it, build a house, maybe start a horse ranch if you still want to work with Mustangs." "A horse ranch," Nathan said slowly, testing the words. "I like the sound of that. Quinn and Hayes Horse Ranch." "Hayes and Quinn," Jolene corrected with a smile. "Alphabetical order." "Fair enough," Nathan laughed. "Hayes and Quinn it is." They were married 3 weeks later by a circuit preacher who happened to be passing through town. It was a simple ceremony in the parlor of Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, with the landlady and Dr. Morrison as witnesses. Jolene wore a simple blue dress she had bought new for the occasion, and Nathan wore his best shirt and had actually trimmed his hair. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Nathan kissed her like she was something precious and irreplaceable, and Jolene felt her heart expand with so much happiness she thought it might burst. They used Jolene's savings to buy 60 acres of good grazing land along the Tongue River, about 4 miles outside Miles City. The property came with a small cabin that needed work, but Nathan was handy with tools and Jolene was a quick learner. They spent the rest of the summer of 1884 fixing up their new home, building corrals and a barn, establishing their horse ranch. Nathan used his reputation and connections to start acquiring wild horses to break and train, and Jolene discovered she had a natural talent for working with the more difficult animals, the ones that had been mistreated or were too stubborn for most trainers. Word spread quickly about the quality of horses coming from the Hayes and Quinn ranch, and by autumn they had more business than they could handle. Cowboys and ranchers came from all over Montana territory to buy their horses, impressed by the animals' training and temperament. Nathan taught Jolene everything he knew about reading horses, about earning their trust rather than breaking their spirit, and she taught him about bookkeeping and business management, skills she had learned watching her father deal with the mining company. Their first winter together was hard, with temperatures dropping far below zero and snow piling up in drifts higher than their cabin windows. They spent long evenings huddled by the fire, playing cards and reading books and making love in the warmth of their bed while the wind howled outside. Jolene's ribs had healed completely, leaving only a faint scar and the occasional ache when the weather changed, a permanent reminder of the day that had changed her life forever. In the spring of 1885, Jolene discovered she was pregnant. She told Nathan one morning over breakfast, watching his face transform from surprise to absolute joy. He picked her up and spun her around carefully, then set her down and placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach with an expression of such wonder and tenderness that Jolene felt tears streaming down her face. "We are going to have a baby," Nathan said, his voice full of awe. "You and me, we are going to be parents. Are you ready for this?" Jolene asked, suddenly nervous. "I know we have only been married less than a year and the ranch is still getting established and there is so much work to do." "I am ready," Nathan said firmly. "Are you?" Jolene thought about all the things that had led her to this moment, all the choices and chances and small miracles that had brought her from a coal-stained city in Pennsylvania to this rough cabin on the Montana frontier. She thought about the woman she had been, so determined to prove she did not need anyone, and the woman she had become, strong enough to accept love and partnership and vulnerability. "I am ready," she said. Their son was born in November of 1885, a healthy boy with Nathan's blue eyes and Jolene's stubborn chin. They named him Daniel, after Nathan's father, and from the moment Jolene held him in her arms, she understood a different kind of love than she had ever known before. Nathan was a devoted father, walking the floor with Daniel through long nights when the baby would not sleep, teaching him to ride almost as soon as he could walk, showing him how to be gentle with animals and honest with people. The ranch continued to prosper over the following years. They hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work, young men who were good with horses and respectful of the fact that Jolene was equal partner in the business. In 1887, Jolene gave birth to twin daughters, Emma and Sarah, and the cabin that had seemed adequate for 2 people suddenly felt cramped and small. Nathan designed and built an addition, a proper house with multiple bedrooms and a real kitchen and a porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Miles City itself was growing and changing, transforming from a rough frontier town into a more established community with schools and churches and civic organizations. Montana became a state in 1889, and there was talk of the Wild West finally being tamed, of civilization bringing order to the chaos. Jolene and Nathan watched these changes with mixed feelings, grateful for the increased stability but nostalgic for the raw freedom of the earlier days. One evening in the summer of 1890, they sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard while the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold over the distant mountains. Daniel was nearly 5 years old now, chasing the twins around with exaggerated monster sounds that made the girls shriek with delighted laughter. The horse ranch had grown to over 200 acres, and they had developed a reputation that extended all the way to Wyoming and the Dakotas. "Do you ever think about that day?" Jolene asked quietly, leaning against Nathan's shoulder. "The stagecoach robbery, you riding in to save me." "Every day," Nathan said, wrapping his arm around her. "It was the luckiest day of my life." "Even though I was stubborn and difficult and did not want to admit I needed help," Jolene teased. "Especially because of that," Nathan said seriously. "You were magnificent, Jolene. Broken ribs and bleeding and still refusing to give up or give in. I fell in love with your strength that day, but I stayed in love with your heart, with the way you let me see the scared, vulnerable parts of you underneath all that toughness, with the way you chose to trust me even when everything in your past had taught you not to trust anyone." Jolene turned to kiss him, still feeling that same spark of connection and passion that had drawn them together 6 years ago. "I would do it all again," she said. "Every painful step, every scary moment if it meant ending up here with you." In 1893, Jolene gave birth to their 4th child, another boy they named Thomas. By then, Daniel was old enough to help with the ranch work, following his father everywhere and soaking up knowledge about horses like a sponge. The twins were developing their own distinct personalities, Emma quiet and thoughtful, Sarah bold and adventurous. The house was full of noise and laughter, and the controlled chaos of a large family. Nathan had long since stopped talking about drifting or moving on. His roots went deep into Montana soil now, anchored by love and family, and the satisfaction of building something lasting. He still worked with wild horses, still felt that thrill when a particularly difficult animal finally came to trust him, but he always came home at the end of the day to Jolene and their children, to the life they had built together from nothing but determination and hope. Jolene occasionally took on security work for the mining company, though only jobs that kept her close to home and involved minimal danger. She had proven her point years ago, proven that she was as capable as any man, and she no longer felt the burning need to demonstrate her toughness to the world. These days, she saved her strength for the ranch, for training horses and raising children and managing the business that bore her name. The 20th century arrived with celebrations and fireworks in Miles City, and Nathan and Jolene stood with their children and watched the sky light up with brilliant colors. They were in their late 30s now, still young but no longer the reckless kids who had met in a hail of bullets on the open plains. Time and experience had weathered them like the landscape around them, wearing away the rough edges but leaving something solid and enduring beneath. "What do you want for the next century?" Nathan asked, holding baby Thomas in his arms while the older children danced around them in excitement. Jolene thought about it, looking at her family, at the life she had never imagined she could have back when she was a lonely girl in Philadelphia dreaming of the West. "More of this," she said simply. "More years with you, watching our children grow, working with the horses, building something that will last beyond us. That is enough. That is everything." And it was. They continued to build and grow, adding more acreage to the ranch, gaining a reputation as some of the best horse trainers in Montana. Daniel grew into a fine young man who took over more and more of the ranch operations, eventually bringing home a wife of his own. The twins married in a double ceremony that became the talk of Miles City for months afterward. Thomas followed his own path, becoming a veterinarian who specialized in horses, carrying on the family tradition in his own way. Nathan and Jolene grew old together, their love deepening and maturing like good whiskey aging in a barrel. They had weathered droughts and harsh winters, economic downturns and personal tragedies, but they had weathered them together, always coming back to the foundation they had built on that first day when a cowboy saw a woman in pain and said the words that changed both their lives forever. "Let me see those ribs now." On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1914, their children threw them a party at the ranch, with friends and neighbors coming from all over the county to celebrate. There was food and music and dancing, and at one point, Nathan pulled Jolene aside and led her away from the crowd to the spot where they had first talked about buying the land and building something permanent. 30 years, Nathan said, looking at her with the same intensity he had shown that day in Mrs. Patterson's boarding house when he had first told her he loved her. "And I still feel the same way I felt then, maybe even more, because now I know exactly how lucky I am." Jolene touched his face, tracing the lines that time had carved around his eyes and mouth, lines earned from years of laughter and hard work and raising a family together. "You saved my life that day," she said. "Not just from the bandits or from my broken ribs, but from the loneliness I had been carrying around for so long. You showed me that being strong did not mean being alone, that I could be tough and vulnerable at the same time, that trusting someone could make me stronger instead of weaker." "We saved each other," Nathan said, pulling her close. "And we are going to keep saving each other every single day for as long as we have left." They stood there together as the sun set over their land, over the life they had built from courage and determination, and a love that had started in the dust and violence of the Wild West and endured into the modern age. Around them, they could hear the sounds of their family celebrating, their children and grandchildren carrying on the legacy that had begun with a chance encounter and a simple offer of help. The Wild West they had known was mostly gone now, replaced by automobiles and telephones and electric lights. Miles City had grown into a proper city, and Montana was a civilized state with laws and order. But some things remained unchanged. The mountains on the horizon, the way the grass bent in the wind, The satisfaction of working with horses and watching them transform from wild creatures into trusted partners. And most importantly, the love between two people who had found each other at exactly the right moment and chosen to build something lasting together. Jolene often thought about that day, about how different her life would have been if Nathan had ridden past instead of stopping to help. She thought about the pain and fear she had felt, and how it had all been worth it because it had led her here, to this life, to this man, to this family. She thought about the younger version of herself, so determined to prove she did not need anyone, and wished she could tell that girl that needing someone was not a weakness, but the bravest thing she would ever do. Nathan sometimes still had nightmares about that day, about arriving too late or not being good enough to protect her. But then he would wake to find Jolene beside him, solid and real and safe, and the nightmares would fade. He had spent so many years running from connection and commitment, afraid of the pain that came with caring too much. And then he had found this stubborn, brave woman who had taught him that the risk was worth taking, that love was worth fighting for. Their story became something of a legend in the area, passed down through generations as an example of frontier romance and resilience. People who knew them often commented on how well-suited they were, how they complemented each other perfectly. Nathan's steady patience balancing Jolene's fierce determination. Jolene's business sense supporting Nathan's skill with horses. But those who knew them best understood that their relationship was not about two perfect people finding each other, but about two flawed, complicated people choosing each other every day, working through difficulties and disappointments, building something strong through consistent effort and unwavering commitment. As they grew older, they spent more time on the porch they had built together, watching the seasons change and the years pass. They talked about everything and nothing, comfortable in the silences that came from decades of companionship. Sometimes Nathan would reach over and gently touch Jolene's side, where her ribs had been broken all those years ago, and she would smile at the gesture, understanding it for what it was. A reminder of where they had started, of the foundation their entire life together was built upon. The ranch continued to thrive under Daniel's management, and Nathan and Jolene gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations, content to offer advice and watch the next generation take over. They had achieved something remarkable, building not just a successful business but a lasting family legacy. Proof that two people with nothing but determination and love could create something that would outlast them both. In the quiet evenings of their later years, Jolene would sometimes say, "Tell me again about the day we met." And Nathan would smile and launch into the familiar story, embellishing certain details and making her laugh at parts she had heard 100 times before. It never got old, that story, because it was their story, the beginning of everything that mattered. And when Nathan came to the part about noticing how she held her side when she breathed, about saying those fateful words that had started everything, Jolene would always interrupt and say, "And I told you I was fine, even though I was clearly dying." "You were not dying," Nathan would correct. "You were too stubborn to die." "I was too stubborn to admit I needed help," Jolene would say, "but you helped me anyway." "Of course I did," Nathan would say, taking her hand. "How could I not?" And that was the truth at the heart of their story, the simple truth that had sustained them through 30 years of marriage and would sustain them through however many years they had left. When someone needed help, you helped them. When you found someone worth staying for, you stayed. When you built something together, you protected it and nurtured it and never took it for granted. The Hayes and Quinn Ranch stood as testament to those principles. Acres of land filled with well-trained horses and multiple generations of family. All of it growing from that single moment of choice when a drifting cowboy decided to ride toward trouble instead of away from it, when a wounded woman decided to trust a stranger with her life, and eventually with her heart. They lived to see their grandchildren grown and their great-grandchildren born. They lived to see automobiles replace horses on most roads, though the ranch continued to thrive, because there would always be people who appreciated a well-trained horse. They lived to see Montana grow and change, the wild frontier of their youth becoming something more settled and civilized, though the mountains and the rivers and the endless sky remained as beautiful and untamed as ever. And through it all, they had each other. On good days and bad days, through sickness and health, through prosperity and hardship, through everything life threw at them, they had each other. It was more than enough. It was everything. When people asked them the secret to a long and happy marriage, Nathan and Jolene would look at each other and smile, sharing a private joke about broken ribs and stubborn pride, and the day their lives had collided in the dust and gunfire of the Old West. But the real answer was simpler than any story. They had chosen each other, fully and completely, and they had kept choosing each other every single day since. That choice, repeated over and over through decades of shared life, was what had transformed a chance encounter into a love story that would last forever. As the sun set on their final years together, they remained what they had always been: partners, lovers, best friends, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. The Wild West was gone, but their love remained, as enduring as the Montana landscape, as constant as the turning of the seasons, as infinite as the sky that stretched above the land they had made their home.